Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning back into Absence Minded. This is episode 5, which luckily means we're only one away from 6, 7. I still can't, Brycie, I still can't do it right. But
Christine,
today,
it's 6, 7.
so much better at it than I am. We are going to dive into another really tricky topic. We are going to talk about Section 825, period 205A1 of FMLA regulations. But wait a second, please come back. Please do not disassociate from this conversation. In all seriousness, we're actually going to talk about the minimum increment of FMLA, which I think is going to be as equally exciting as explaining the regulatory text of it. So, Brycie, why don't you tell us a little bit about how this came up? And for everyone who's listening in, the one thing that I'd like to share is when we come up with our topics each month, they're typically based upon a pretty tricky question that a client recently sent us. So this is related to something very recent that a client came to us with.
Yes, our need to dig into Section 825.205 arose out of an IRL situation, indeed. So, and left us with a really good, lesson that we try to pass along to our customers frequently, but it was a good reminder. So what, in short, happened here is that a customer of ours was implementing with a vendor who, as it turns out, whose minimum increment of leave that they could administer out of their system was greater than the minimum increment of leave that my customer had been using in their FMLA policy, clearly in their time off policies, since, as a reminder, the rule is that under FMLA, your minimum increment of FMLA leave has to align with the minimum increment of leave you use for your other time off policies like PTO, as long as that minimum increment is not greater than 1 hour. And now you know what Section 825.205 actually says. And so this was a bit of a surprise that we ran into during implementation to discover, hey, our minimum increment that we know and love, which was 1 minute, does not align with our vendor's capabilities, which is 1 hour. So what do we do? And this is like a really fun FMLA 101 concept that I personally hadn't dug into for a while, because most folks use a pretty small minimum increment of leave, 1 minute, 15 minutes, maybe. That's about as high as I've seen people go in the recent past. And now to be looking at a minimum increment of leave of 1 hour based on vendor limitations, which, by the way, also meant having to change the minimum increment of PTO.
That's a big deal.
Which is a huge deal. And my customer had contact center operations. Like, this was not the place to have to do that. So it was not a fun learning. But what it left us asking is, what happens when an employee needs FMLA leave in a shorter increment than our new minimum increment of leave of 1 hour? And because I just hadn't dealt with this in so long, I was kind of unsure. And that's an uncomfortable feeling for me, first of all. So it was very humbling. But it led us to our expert, who we rely on in these cases. So I went straight to Jeff Novak on this, and I provided some supposals, and got some expert advice. And his first line of his response was, "This is a super yummy question," which just validated for us, we are working with the right man on this.
And then did he break out in song? Did he have a sing-song voice?
I mean, in my head, when I read his emails, they're always in song. That's one way to make FMLA more fun. Just sing.
It is. It is.
What I want to start with really is what I've come to learn is kind of what not to do. And then Christine's going to help us go through the happy path, our recommendation. If you're looking for any reason at having to change your minimum increment of leave, and you're facing a situation where you could potentially have employees out of work for an FMLA qualifying reason in shorter increments than your minimum increment of leave, what do you do about that? That's really the question.
Yeah. So let's lay out a scenario where we have an employee who has a sleep disorder and they show up 15 minutes late for work. So what would that look like, Brycie? What are some of the options that we got from our on-hand expert?
So we're at work 15 minutes late, but my employer's minimum increment of leave is 1 hour. So here's what not to do in that situation. What I've seen, one approach is to protect that late arrival. So make sure that there's no adverse employment action under FMLA, but just don't decrement that employee's FMLA entitlement because it's less than our minimum increment of leave. And this is definitely potentially problematic because it could be giving the optics that you're not protecting the time. And also, it's not great for you as the employer because you're leaving FMLA time on the table there and like having to protect time, but not decrementing an employee's bucket is not something that we want as employers. We want to be able to decrement the time actually taken. So this is not, plus the administrative considerations of that, like making sure that we have documented that there needs to be protection, but we're not docking anything would be really hard to manage administratively. So that's a no-go. Option one.
You're like leave savvy employees. They're going to figure that out real quick.
Absolutely.
We know who that person is.
Option two of bad decisions is consider the late arrival as not protected, not covered under FMLA because it's less than your minimum increment and therefore just doesn't qualify under the FMLA. And I have actually seen this perception bloom as a result of some of the paid family and medical leave laws that are out there that have some longer minimum increments of leave. For example, Paid Leave Oregon has a minimum increment of intermittent leave of 1 day. And if somebody misses time under Oregon law that is less than that is less than 1 day, it just doesn't count under Paid Leave Oregon. It doesn't apply. And so there are some jumps from that to FMLA, and that is misguided. Let's not do that. Because what's going to happen is undoubtedly there's going to be attendance action taken on those absences, and it is protected time, even if taken in less than your minimum increment. And so this option two of a bad idea is really a big compliance risk. And so we're putting that on the naughty list too.
My heart was racing, with anxiety.
I know,
as we were
right?
talking through that. So
terrifying.
if we're going to use like a barometer of my heart rate, let's not do that one. Wholeheartedly agree.
Yes. Okay. So option three, still a bad idea, is to protect the late arrival. Charge your minimum increment of 1 hour of FMLA time, even though the employee began work after their late arrival 15 minutes in. And so the problem with this approach is you are docking your employee for more FMLA leave time than they actually took. And that is specifically called out in section 825.205 as a no-no. We cannot do that. And so that is potentially another compliance problematic approach. So Christine, why don't you walk us through the happy path, our recommended path for how to handle this?
So number 3 would be okay if you then sent that employee to the break room. So they show up 15 minutes late due to their sleep disorder. You say, hey, the minimum increment of FMLA that you can use here is 1 hour. So we're going to have you go to the break room for 45 minutes and then have that individual go to work after that 1 hour period ends. And then you subsequently charge the 1 hour of FMLA, which again, matches your minimum increment of leave. Option 2 is just send this employee to work immediately and charge him or her the 15 minutes of FMLA leave. So the question that came up here was, hey, related to option 1 of having the employee sit in the break room for an extra 45 minutes, isn't that in conflict with some of the other FMLA regulation that we have that says an employer may not require an employee to take more leave than is necessary to address the circumstances that precipitated the need for leave? And yes, I do have that memorized, but no, I don't. We feel that even with this provision, like you can, as an employer, require that individual to exhaust that 1 hour as long as you don't make the employee work that 1 hour. So even though it feels like this is a little bit in conflict, and this is interpretation, we don't have an opinion letter on this, we don't have the regulation that explicitly tells us this, but based upon some of the expert advisement that we've got, we do think that this approach would be okay. Or again, just don't even bother with the sit in the break room, get on your phone, what have you, for 45 minutes. Just send that individual to work immediately and charge them the 15 minutes. So those are the two options that we were really left with on this. Just like Brycie said, what feels like FMLA 101, but then you really start thinking about it and it's not.
I don't love that option too, honestly, Christine, because it's like it's not consistent with your stated policy.
Agreed.
If you tell your absence vendor our minimum increment of leave is 1 hour, and then you say, actually, please charge this person 15 minutes, they're not going to be able to do it. Like I'm more a fan, even though it feels wrong in my soul, I'm more a fan of option one, which is have the employee sit it out for the additional 45 minutes. They shouldn't be doing any work during that time. And that's probably how if that's your true minimum increment is an hour and that's what you've always done, that's probably how you're handling PTO as well. Like just, if you need to take some PTO, it has to be in an hour.
Yep.
Which also means you shouldn't be here during that time. You shouldn't be working.
And it's sort of like a checks and balance too.
Yeah.
If we have that employee who's, no one does this, like no one that we know, obviously. But if you have that employee who's maybe using the 15 minutes late, it's really a tardy and it's not related to the FMLA condition at hand, but you can't really verify it one way or another. Enforcing that 1 hour, I think, is a little bit of a checks and balance and avoiding that type of issue with your employees.
That's the gist. So the really my hearted approach is thumbs up, is have the employee not work for the duration of that minimum increment, even if they show up 15 minutes in. If your minimum increment is an hour, have them sit it out for that hour, dock that hour of their FMLA entitlement, and then send them on their way to work.
And Brycie, I loved what you said. I just as we wrap this up too, what you brought up at the beginning of the conversation about being aware of vendor capabilities. So this was a learning for us as well. I think it's important, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but it is important that we have a good understanding of what your vendor capabilities are with regard to this space. Because if you are primarily, maybe you're manufacturing, you're a non-exempt workforce, you are going to want a vendor partner who can track leave in a 15-minute increment.
Or less.
Yes, most likely. If you're mostly a professional exempt workforce, you might be okay with a 1 hour increment. But I can only imagine, like, as you've said, this was really difficult for your client to have to work through when they found out.
And this story absolutely has a happy ending. And I wish I could say it was because of me, but truly the vendor here saved the day and they were able to make adjustments and change to meet this client's minimum increment of 1 minute. And so it all was well in the end, but the close call that we had in communicating to organizational leadership of this production-based environment that we now have people coming in late that we have to have sit out production-based work because of our minimum increment of leave, like that just was not going to be anything but messy.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it calls for, if you have an RFP going out the door for a leave provider and you have one question in there about intermittent leave and it says, do you track intermittent leave time? That's probably not going deep enough. It's really like I would take all of the options that we as employers have under FMLA and just catalog like what choices did we make here? Limiting bonding to being taken on a continuous basis is another, it's a choice we have under FMLA, right? And so take all of those FMLA choices that we have, catalog how we're doing it, and make sure that we're choosing a vendor who can administer to our choices or that we're ready to leave those choices on the table and match the vendor's requirement.
Agreed. I love it. And we hope that you choose to continue to listen to our podcast as we continue to have episodes come out into 2026. Happy New Year, everyone, and happy holidays.
Bye.
The information provided in this podcast is for general information and education purposes only. It's not intended to be and should not be construed as legal, financial, or human resources advice. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, laws and policies regarding leave management vary by jurisdiction and may change over time. Listeners should consult with a qualified attorney, HR professional, or relevant expert for advice specific to their situation. The views and opinions expressed by the hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of their employers or any affiliated organizations.